Tonight at 10, the people of Scotland have rejected independence by a decisive majority. There was joy and relief for those who'd campaigned to keep Scotland within the United Kingdom.
We know that we're proud Scots, but we're proud to be British and we're better together. Yeah!
But dejection and disbelief for those who believed that an independent Scotland was within reach.
I'm devastated. The sole reason is I wanted more than anything a yes vote.
Within hours of the verdict, Alex Salmond announced he'd be stepping down as First Minister and leader of the Scottish National Party.
For me, as leader, my time is nearly over. But for Scotland, the campaign continues, and the dream shall never die.
At Westminster, questions are raised about the Prime Minister's suggestion of new devolved powers for the rest of the UK.
So now it is time for our United Kingdom to come together and to move forward. A vital part of that will be a balanced settlement, fair to people in Scotland and, importantly, to everyone in England, Wales and Northern Ireland as well.
We'll have details and analysis of the referendum, what it means for Scotland and the constitutional changes being suggested for the rest of the United Kingdom.
And coming up in Sports Day, Wembley Stadium is chosen to host the final and semi-finals of Euro 2020. The tournament will be spread across Europe, including 4 matches in Glasgow.
Good evening from Edinburgh, where the official result of the referendum on independence was declared earlier today. The people of Scotland voted decisively to remain within the United Kingdom. Within hours, the First Minister, Alex Salmond, announced his decision to resign, as David Cameron declared that not only would more powers be devolved from London to Edinburgh, but changes would also be made to the governance of England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Well, this was the outcome of yesterday's vote. More than 1.6 million backed independence, but more than 2 million objected. It was a 10% margin of victory, wider than most polls had predicted, on a record turnout of 85%. Tonight we'll have the latest reaction and analysis, and more on the far-reaching constitutional changes planned for the entire UK. But first, our political editor Nick Robinson reports on the day Scotland said no to independence. A little warning, there's some flash photography in the report.
Put away the flags. Stop the campaigning. The great national debate is over. More people cared, more people believed, more voted for independence than ever before. But for now, that dream is dead.
Scotland has voted no in this referendum on independence. The result in Fife has taken the no campaign over the line, and the official result of this referendum is a no.
The final result, 45% yes, 55% no, was clearer than most had predicted. It produced joy from backers of the Union and despair from those who believe Scotland could do better. This morning, Alex Salmond put a brave face on defeat, accepting what he called the democratic verdict. But this afternoon he called the media to the First Minister's office in Edinburgh and announced that he would soon quit the job.
For me, as leader, my time is nearly over. But for Scotland, the campaign continues, and the dream shall never die.
He warned that David Cameron could renege on the promise to give Scotland greater powers and to do it fast.
The real guardians of progress are no longer politicians at Westminster or even at Holyrood, but the energised activism of tens of thousands of people who I predict will refuse to meekly go back into the political shadows. We have now the opportunity to hold Westminster's feet to the fire on the vow that they have made to devolve further meaningful power to Scotland.
The story of the night was clear almost from the very first result. at 1:30 this morning.
No, 19,036.
The No campaign, subdued for so long, celebrated as result after result in 28 out of 32 areas had them winning. In Glasgow, Nicola Sturgeon, Alex Salmond's deputy, and surely his successor now, knew it was all over. The news from Scotland's biggest city, a consolation prize.
Yes, 194,000. No, 169,347.
Not so long ago, few would have believed they would do this well or come this close. But for Alex Salmond, as he left home in the early hours, it simply was not close enough. For them, those who'd fought for Scotland to remain in the UK, the relief was palpable.
You represent the majority of opinion and your voices have been heard. We've taken on the argument and we've won. The silent have spoken.
Those watching outside Scotland had simply had to hold their breath. The Prime Minister watched for much of the night, aware that a yes vote would destroy not just his country, but his reputation.
The people of Scotland have spoken, and it is a clear result. They have kept our country of 4 nations together. And like millions of other people, I am delighted.
The debate was settled for a generation, he said. There could be no disputes, no reruns. Scotland would get more power, but change would go much further than that.
Just as the people of Scotland will have more power over their affairs, so it follows that the people of England, Wales and Northern Ireland must have a bigger say over theirs. The rights of these voters need to be respected, preserved and enhanced.
The Tory leader revived an old undelivered manifesto promise to ensure that English laws are made only by English votes.
But I have long believed that a crucial part missing from this national discussion is England. We have heard the voice of Scotland, and now the millions of voices of England must also be heard.
Some will ask, why on earth are politicians talking about constitutional change on the very day when the Scottish people have rejected independence? The answer is clear, and it's here in Glasgow. The people of this great city voted by a majority to leave the UK. The anger they feel at the way Westminster currently runs things is felt up and down what remains our United Kingdom. Watching these extraordinary events unfold, the Queen has been at her Scottish estate Balmoral. Tonight, in a rare written statement, she urged people to unite in their enduring love of Scotland. Knowing the people of Scotland as I do, she wrote, I have no doubt that Scots are able to express strongly held opinions before coming together again in a spirit of mutual respect and support. She ends simply, my family and I will do all we can to help and support you in this important task. Elizabeth R., Balmoral. Tonight, her kingdom remains united, but an awful lot divides people over how it ought to be run. Nick Robinson, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, more than 3.5 million Scots took part in yesterday's referendum, a level of electoral turnout not seen in Britain since 1951. The no vote was boosted in more rural parts of Scotland, including Dumfries and Galloway and Perth and Kinross, but the city of Edinburgh also voted strongly against. The Yes campaign pointed to notable success in Glasgow, Scotland's biggest city, as we saw in Nick's report there. Well, our special correspondent Alan Little, who's followed the entire campaign, examines the factors that convinced the majority of voters to back the union.
Glasgow woke this morning to the news that it had voted yes, but the country had not. To too many, the blueprint for independence was incomplete, with too few clear answers on key questions. Edinburgh, home to Scotland's financial services industry, voted 61 to 39 to stay in the UK.
This is quite a well-off country, and I think a lot of people felt they had quite a lot to lose. And I don't think it's a surprise that parts of the country where people didn't have quite so much to lose would vote yes.
300 years of history, achievement, just bring people together. We should be coming together rather than breaking apart.
Even here, though, more than 1 in 3 voted yes.
I'm devastated, yeah, absolutely devastated. Been up all night, heartbroken, but also inspired because we know that half the people get it. So that's kind of nice. It's going to be a bit weird though, knowing that half the people are scared to change and half are ready to do it.
I think overall it's been very, very beneficial to Scotland, despite the fact that we didn't win.
Although I was a no voter when I heard the results, I actually started crying because relieved, but also kind of worried about what happens now.
In less prosperous places, more voters favoured independence. Both Dundee and Scotland's biggest city, Glasgow, voted yes. Here, Labour voters who crossed to the yes camp in large numbers were decisive. Is it over for them now? Will they return to the Labour fold?
I'm devastated. Sole reason is I wanted more than anything a yes vote.
A change in Labour's policies that were too close to Tory policies for me. And I decided, I obviously listened to the SNP's views and promises and so on at the time, and decided to change the SNP at that time.
After what happened with Tony Blair and stuff, I don't think the working class necessarily trust Labour anymore, and they've obviously gone over to the SNP and maybe offer a wee bit more hope.
In this, the intervention in the last stages of the campaign by a seemingly rejuvenated Gordon Brown may have helped stem the flow of Labour voters to the yes camp.
The margin of victory for the Union was clear and decisive and beyond dispute. Does that mean job done? The Union is saved? 45% of the population of the country, on a high turnout, voted to end United Kingdom statehood in Scotland. That would have been unthinkable even 15 years ago when the Scottish Parliament was first set up.
We've got to remember that 1.6 million people of our fellow citizens voted yesterday to leave the United Kingdom. A majority in Glasgow, a large majority in Dundee. And I think that the really important thing to do at the moment is to try and understand and then to respond adequately and effectively to the reasons why people voted yes.
The Anglo-Scottish Union has survived the greatest challenge to its existence in 300 years. Scotland has settled the question peacefully and democratically. But the popular challenge to the UK's legitimacy in Scotland has not gone away. Alan Little, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Well, Alex Salmond's decision to step down as First Minister and leader of the Scottish National Party will take effect in mid-November. Mr Salmond has been a towering figure in Scottish politics for 2 decades, a period in which he led the transformation of the SNP from a small political force to a party of government which put Scottish independence right at the top of the agenda. Our correspondent James Cook reports now on the resignation of one of Britain's most charismatic political leaders. There's flash photography in this report too.
It could have been so different. For weeks, the world had been watching Alex Salmond, wondering would he be Prime Minister of an independent Scotland. It wasn't to be, and today, in defeat, he faced the cameras.
Let us not dwell on the distance we have fallen short.
To many people, Alex Salmond is the Scottish National Party. He hails from Linlithgow, a traditional Labour stronghold in central Scotland. But his rise and that of Scottish nationalism are inextricably linked. Alex Salmond went to Westminster in 1987, a democratic insurgent determined to wrest Scotland from London's grasp. He was already shaking up what had been a rather eccentric party when, 3 years later, he was elected for his first stint as leader.
Well and truly cut.
His gradual approach to the pursuit of independence very nearly paid off. First, campaigning for a Scottish Parliament, celebrating alongside his political rivals, when this referendum at least went his way.
Well, I think we better sit up and take notice that something is changing in Scotland.
0.76%.
In the end, Alex Salmond served 2 decade-long stints as SNP leader. The last 10 years saw stunning success. He took his party to power at Holyrood and then went one better.
I heard a rumour. I think we won the election.
Winning a second term with a majority most said was impossible. It gave him a mandate to pursue his life's goal. And 2 years ago, he shook hands with the Conservative Prime Minister on an agreement to put his dream to the test.
So here we go. Go Scotland!
Alex Salmond has always been a populist politician. but he doesn't appeal to all. Critics say he hectors opponents, putting off women voters in particular. Tonight, though, there was a rare glimpse of a different Alex Salmond, heading home with his wife after a remarkable week and a remarkable career. James Cook, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Once again, Brian is with me, Brian Taylor, our Scotland political editor. Brian, the end of Mr Salmond's leadership, the end of this momentous referendum campaign. What are your conclusions?
Just standing beneath Edinburgh Castle here reminds me, Hugh, that I've covered Scottish politics since Braveheart was a boy. I remember the referendum in 1979 when devolution was thwarted and the SNP at that time almost fell apart. That will not happen, adamantly will not happen on this occasion. Alex Salmond is very largely responsible for that. He has matured the SNP, he has allowed it to grow, encouraged it to grow, and has made it above all a modern party of government. Another little thought, the Scots poet Hugh MacDiarmid talked of the Caledonian anti-zizigay, which is a posh way for saying that we Scots are capable of looking two ways at once. We can gurn and gripe, or we can be confident and capacious. Alex Salmond argued, always argued, will continue to argue very much for the latter. Be confident. A good motto for Mr Salmond, and perhaps also a good motto for Scotland on this quite remarkable day.
Brian, again, thank you very much. Brian Taylor there for us, our Scotland political editor. Well, it became clear early this morning when David Cameron spoke in Downing Street that the result of the referendum could trigger extensive constitutional change, not just here in Scotland, but across the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister spoke of new powers for England, Wales and Northern Ireland, but doubts were raised almost immediately about the likelihood of cross-party agreement and about the very ambitious timetable for drafting new proposals with a general election just 8 months away. Our Deputy Political Editor James Landale reports on possible changes to the Constitution and the likely obstacles.
It was a solemn vow by the leaders of the UK's largest parties, a vow to let Scotland decide more of its taxes, welfare and spending. But to date, the government promised similar powers to the rest of the UK and fewer powers for Scottish MPs at Westminster.
Further devolution to Scotland, it becomes inconceivable to continue to allow Scottish members to vote on everything that is happening in England, when, as you know, English members and indeed Scottish members can't vote on so much of what is happening in Scotland. That is the heart of the issue.
So what is the government's timetable? It's hoping to agree its plan for UK-wide devolution by November, publish draft laws in January and introduce the changes after it's been put to voters in the election. Labour say they'll move quickly too on devolution to Scotland, but they want a national debate on English devolution before holding a constitutional convention in the autumn of next year, a much slower process.
One lesson we know is that we can't do this in a knee-jerk, quick-fix way. We've got to do it in the right way, but the most important thing is it can't be just stitched up in Westminster or Whitehall. I don't think people would stand for that. We need to start with people on the change they want to see.
Labour see the government's plans to give English MPs a greater say over English laws as a trap. They fear that curbing the powers of Scottish MPs, most of whom are Labour, would make it harder for Ed Miliband as Prime Minister to get his legislation and his budgets through the Commons. So none of this constitutional change is going to come easy. David Cameron does not have the full support of Labour, and he also has some trouble in his own ranks, many of whom think that Scotland is being offered too much, too fast.
Extensive promises have been made to the Scottish people, which will assume that Scottish politicians can continue to adjudicate on taxes raised on English taxpayers, and also assume that English taxpayers will continue to shore up the whole settlement with extensive transfers of funds.
I'm going to post these. The UKIP leader wrote to all Scottish MPs asking them to stop voting on English issues now.
The English need to be able to vote and debate on their issues alone in the House of Commons. And if Scottish MPs agree to do that, that'll be a very significant step forward.
Throughout Westminster, there are reminders that this Parliament represents all four corners of the UK, including Northern Ireland and Wales, where expectations have now been raised.
Scotland has been offered first-class devolution. There's a risk that Wales will get second or even third-class devolution, and we must make sure that our devolution settlement is as good, if not better, than what they get in Scotland.
So the stakes could not be higher. Honouring this vow could transform Britain's constitutional settlement. Breaking it could lead to yet another breach of public trust in politics. And already, agreement looks hard to find. James Landale, BBC News, Westminster.
Some of England's biggest cities, including Birmingham and Manchester, have backed calls for greater devolution of power from Westminster, and those calls have been echoed in some of the biggest regions, notably the north of England. Our home editor Mark Easton has been exploring the potential impact of devolved powers in different parts of England.
The restlessness of the Scottish lion has stirred the lions of England. Today we've seen northern English newspapers demanding similar devolution to their Scots neighbours. London's mayor demanding fiscal devolution for big cities. And though the government says it won't happen, popular calls for an English parliament.
All the Scottish, it's just been talked about all the time. That's all it is. And it should be definitely a bigger voice for the English.
I think we would all like to see a devolvement of power and decision making from London to local regions.
I want independence for England, but it's not going to happen, is it? Because we're not going to get a referendum.
It's certainly not easy. The promise that MPs represented at Westminster will only vote on matters affecting their nation risks having rival UK and English governments under the same roof.
I think there's a real determination to avoid having a UK government and an English central government. That's why they're talking of devolution, pushing powers down to the regions, cities, towns, where the power would be, rather than having two opposite governments eyeing each other in London.
In a field in Leicestershire is the exact spot identified as the middle of England, now the epicentre of a new debate that goes far beyond the Prime Minister's promise of English votes for English laws.
Demands for change will be hard to ignore, but finding agreement on what that change should look like will be much harder.
Since the Dark Ages, England has set its face against regional government. There's been fierce resistance to almost any reform of administrative boundaries, with some activists removing or relocating offending road signs. And in a referendum for a northeast regional government a decade ago, an inflatable white elephant helped convince people resoundingly to vote no to more politicians. But all three major UK parties now talk about empowering cities in England to counteract the dominance of the capital.
Here in Bristol, as in many English cities, you'll find a strong sense that London and what's seen as the Westminster elite have too much control over people's lives. Demands for devolution are often driven by a distrust of national politics and national politicians.
That is good in theory, as long as you've got the appropriate people in place in the cities who can manage it well.
What's the point of having a parliament if all the different cities have all the power over themselves?
Maybe there's strength in numbers, and maybe we should all be together.
The search for a new and fair settlement for a united kingdom looks set to open up ancient divisions. Mark Easton, BBC News, in the middle of England.
Well, we'll have more on the referendum in just a few minutes, but let's take a moment now to look at some of the day's other news stories. French fighter jets have attacked a base belonging to the Islamic State militant group in northern Iraq. France is the first country to join the United States in military action against the jihadists who control much of Iraq and Syria. The British pharmaceutical company GlaxoSmithKline has been fined a record £297 million by a Chinese court after it admitted bribing doctors and health officials in order to win contracts. The court also imposed a suspended prison sentence on Mark Riley, who used to run the company's China division. He'll now be deported. The Director of Children's Services in Rotherham, Joyce Thacker, is to leave her post. In the wake of the child sex abuse scandal, she'd faced criticism after a report said senior council managers had underplayed the scale of the abuse, which involved up to 1,400 children over several years. Administrators have announced 628 redundancies at the collapsed retailer Phones for You. The business, which has a total workforce of more than 5,500, went into administration earlier this week after it lost a major contract. Let's talk about the votes themselves and the results. The first result in last night's referendum came from the smallest local authority area of Clackmannanshire. The first of many no votes from the 32 counting centres. And the overall verdict was clear by around 5 o'clock this morning. Jeremy Vine was tracking all of the results as they came in.
Yes on 45%, no on 55%, a clear 10% margin for the noes, wider than anything the polls were telling us really in the fortnight running up to this dramatic day and night of voting and counting. Let me show you the map of Scotland after this result. We've coloured in areas where the no's won red. So have a look at this. So the no's in red and almost the whole of Scotland covered. You can see, though, the 4 areas where the yes votes were ahead. Those 3, Glasgow and surrounding, and then Dundee in the northeast. But largely the map has been covered red. And if I take you back to our councils here, these are the 32 council areas in which the voting was counted. And you can see awash with red here. So many red councils, looking for the 4 green ones. If I reorder them, we'll find them. Glasgow, the biggest, went for yes, 53%. So did North Lanarkshire, another big council. That went for yes. It wasn't enough, though. Edinburgh, Fife, South Lanarkshire, Aberdeenshire, the other huge councils going no. And the first results we had came in on the smaller councils. Clackmannanshire, Shetland, Orkney, all coming in early in the evening, all going no. And it was quite some time before Dundee City became our first yes. So, after this extraordinary night, I can show you here a spread of these council areas with the no's on this side and the yeses on this side. And again, this just illustrates, you won't call it a whitewash, this no margin, but it's certainly a very convincing victory to those who argued that Scotland should stay in the United Kingdom. Look at these 4 councils here. These were the 4 yeses: Dundee City, West Dunbartonshire, Glasgow, North Lanarkshire. Those were the only 4 yeses of 32 councils. Come down with me and you see the other councils. You'll see the margins increasing as you come down here until we get to the councils which voted no most decisively. Scottish Borders, Dumfries and Galloway, for example. Conservative leading on the border with England. Orkney and Shetland, the island councils. But yes, this was convincing. As you can see, in the end, only 4 council areas going with the arguments of those who said that Scotland should leave the UK.
Jeremy Vine taking us through the range of results there. There's further analysis, a full breakdown of the results for you on the BBC website, bbc.co.uk/Scotland Decides, and all the links are there for you to see. Well, there's been reaction to the referendum, to the result in all parts of the UK today. And in a moment, we'll hear more views on how the result was received here in Scotland. But first, Rita Chakrabarti has been speaking to people in Lincoln about their perspective on the people's verdict in Scotland.
Under the majestic towers of the ancient cathedral, the people of Lincoln could only watch events in Scotland. Like the rest of the UK, they had no say in the decision, but that didn't mean they didn't care.
Today we felt immense relief. It's the best outcome.
And what's it mean to you then? Why are you relieved?
Well, I think for me,
we're a united kingdom.
We're a united kingdom, yeah. We're better together. I think that title says it all. And I think we'd be losing something if we split Scotland away from the UK.
But I think it's been done the right way too, and the Scots chose for themselves.
The main response on this English high street is one of relief that Scotland has voted to stay. But people's thoughts are now turning to where the union goes from here.
Something definitely needs to change, I think. You know, we had the same system for quite a few years, and it perhaps needed to evolve with the times and with the political situation at the moment. So.
The cathedral houses one of the few copies of Magna Carta, the 800-year-old document which limited the king's powers. With a transfer of power over tax, spending and welfare about to take place to Scotland, where does that now leave the rest of the UK?
I think it's right that the Scots do have devolved powers, but I also think it's right that the English and the Welsh and the Northern Irish do as well.
I think there's been an unequal balance between Scotland having more powers, it gets more money through subsidies than English people do. And I think that's unfair, and we deserve as English people to have the same powers, maybe even an English Parliament.
Many here understand it's not just Scotland that's likely to change. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Lincoln.
This was a campaign fought on the streets and filled with passion. For those who won, joy and jubilation. For those left disappointed, heartbreak and despair.
I think it's the older generation that have really let the young people down. It's a really sad day, honestly.
We were all in tears when the
result came through, because it's that big a deal to people in Scotland, it's that big a deal to yes voters.
Here in Scotland's biggest city, Glasgow, a majority of voters indicated they wanted to leave the Union. But still, the Yes campaign fell short. The sentiment here was not reflected in the country as a whole. People at this snack bar were relieved that independence is no longer on the menu.
I love Scotland very much, but I don't know if we could manage on our own. I don't know about that.
There was an energetic grassroots campaign for Yes, but a quiet majority, like these people in North Berwick, made sure their voice was heard.
Absolutely delighted, and we've been absolutely fed up for the last 2 years.
I'd like to think this is the end of it. I think had a chance and the country said no, so as far as I'm concerned that should be it.
So Scotland remains as part of the United Kingdom. There's now a time for reflecting, reuniting, healing after a tumultuous few months. Lorna Gordon, BBC News.
Well, once again, Nick Robinson, our political editor, is with me. And Nick, I think it's fair to say we'll be reflecting on what's happened here for a very long time.
I don't think I have ever experienced a day quite like this, have we? A vote to reject major constitutional change in one country in the UK has actually triggered a debate about major constitutional change in all the countries of the UK. The man without whom this might not have happened, Alex Salmond, has quit, meaning that he won't be here to lead that debate when it really kicks off. And the people who were on the streets with their saltires and chanting and protesting, they lost the vote, but there is a sense they might just get a little bit of the change that they were actually wanting. Why has all this happened? Because I think when we analyse this vote, it wasn't a vote purely about independence, about self-government, about national identity. In many ways, it was treated by the electorate here as a referendum on the Westminster establishment, on the way power works in the United Kingdom today. And many people know, as well as Yes voters, were deeply, deeply unhappy. And I think those leaders in Westminster sniffed the air and thought we could easily have lost here. And what's more, if there were referendums held in Cornwall or the North West or the North East, we could lose there too. Hence the promises of change. And I think what you'll see now is that a subject that was normally seen as one for kind of political train spotters and nerds, constitutional change, is now going to be at the centre of politics. David Cameron is posing now as the man who will fight for England. There will be a fight here for the people who fight for Scotland in all the other countries too. It's now at the very centre of politics again.
Nick, again, thanks very much. Nick Robinson there for us, our political editor. And that is all from the team in Edinburgh on the day that Scotland's future within the United Kingdom was reaffirmed. In a moment on BBC One, time for the news where you are, but we'll leave you with some of the enduring images of referendum night in Scotland. Good night.
Yes, 194,000. No, 169,000.
No, 194,000.
The BBC's forecast now is that Scotland has voted no to independence.
So now it is time for our United Kingdom to come together and to move forward.
As leader, my time is nearly over. But for Scotland, the campaign continues and the dream shall never die.